Hello, my friend. And it is hump day. We are halfway through our week. And on Monday, Morning Cup of Joe, we were talking about difficult conversations. And whoa, what a response. We got a lot of people interested in saying, hey, I'm having difficult conversations, or I'm trying to have a difficult conversation, or I need to have a difficult conversation, but I need help. And so I'm here today on After the Coffee to share with you my 10 steps to positive resolution for difficult conversations. It's not necessarily conflict in nature, but these are, well, conversations that we need to have, but we shy away from oftentimes due to emotional elements, both our own emotions and the emotions or the perceived or anticipated emotions of the individual that we are having this conversation with. So here we go. Ready? Number one, as soon as you find yourself being triggered, ask the individual responsible for that if they have time later on that day or possibly the next day. We don't want it to go on longer than that. If they have time where you guys can talk. If they ask, well, what is it about? You just say, well, I want to run some things by you. That's all you have to say. And what this does is it gives you some time to process your emotions and your thoughts so that when you get into the conversation, you're not already, you're still feeling that anxiety that we get when we have to have a difficult conversation, right? It gives you that time to be able to process. That's super important. Okay, now, number two, I want you to journalize. I want you to get a sheet of paper and write down what triggered you. How did it make you feel? And then try to come up with rationale and understanding. Sometimes it's like obvious, not a problem. You can, boom, you're right into it. Sometimes we struggle. And there's a reason for that, because our emotions come from our limbic system in our brain, which is responsible for our emotions, but does not process language. That's why we have such a hard time to find the words to describe how we feel. The other thing that you might want to write down in that journal is, how does this individual's behavior, because we're assuming it's a behavioral thing, how does that impact others? And I'll give you an example. I had a colleague of mine that I worked with. We had a good relationship, and I got him, meaning I understood where he was coming from, and I didn't get offended. But he had a tendency to use sarcasm a lot. Well, if you knew him, you just kind of like go, it's Joe. That's how he is. But people who were not familiar with him, when he used sarcasm, were very put off. So it was a conversation that I had to have with Joe about his sarcasm. Now, it helped that we had a really good relationship to begin with. We'd known each other for a few years, but it was time that I sit down with him and talk to him about his sarcasm. But I had to journalize it too. I wanted to make sure that I picked the right words and that Joe knew that I cared enough to prepare the conversation so that it went well. Now, number three, be clear on the objective. What do you want to have accomplished at the end of this conversation? Are you asking for a behavioral change? Or you want them to become more personally aware of what they're doing or what they're saying and the impact that it causes? Maybe perhaps even a commitment to reduce, if not eliminate, that behavior. Really important. Begin with the end in mind. Know what you want to walk away with, because so oftentimes when emotions get involved, we get scattered all over the place. But if we have a focal point of what we want to walk away with at the end of the conversation, it helps keep us focused. Very important. Okay, now, number four, once you've written down what you recognized triggered you, and it may be a concern that you have for yourself, or it may be a concern that you have not only for yourself, but for other people. Now, I want you to write down what you want to talk about and why it's important, because this is how you're going to open the conversation with this individual. Say, yeah, I want to talk to you about this because it causes this. Or you could be on their side from the standpoint of looking out for them. Gosh, when you use sarcasm, not everybody knows and understands. Number one, not everybody knows you. Not everybody understands that you don't mean anything by it. So my concern is that if it continues, you could impact your ability to be successful by, stifling important relationships to your career, something along those lines. Okay. So what you want to talk about and why it's important. Got to connect those two. All right. Now, number 5, do your best to state specifically what was said or done that created this trigger in you, right? We're talking about factual events, not your own feelings or anything like that necessarily. Let's say Joe had made a sarcastic remark and it didn't affect me, but I noticed that Carol over there kind of just shook her head. Carol's an important part of the team and an important individual for Joe to make sure that he can gain her support and her cooperation. Now, number 6, once you've stated what you want to talk about, why it's important, you've given some factual occurrences or situations that are directly connected to this behavior, if you will, then I want you to ask them, their perspective. Ask them for their perspective. How do you see it? Oh, Carol's oversensitive. That may be the case. And we still need her cooperation and support. So when you ask them, just listen. Okay? When they're giving their perspective, don't listen with the intent to respond, object, rebuke, judge. Just listen. Number 7, use active listening, which means attending the conversation, nodding, making sounds like, uh-huh, mm-hmm, okay, I understand. Go on. Tell me more. When you say this, can you help me understand what you mean? So you're going to make inquiries, ask clarifying questions. So active listening, not interrupting, let them finish their thoughts. You may have to jot down some of the things they said so that you say, I just wrote these down because I need clarification. I need to understand. Tell me more about that. When they feel that they're being listened to, this helps them sort out their emotional standpoint. So that's very, very important. Okay, so now we reach number 8. Ask them, what could they do to help resolve the concerns that you raised when you asked for the meeting, that you wanted to talk to them, what you wanted to talk about and why it was important. Okay, so allow them to now take responsibility for the behavior or the actions that were unconstructive, and help them formulate how they're going to correct this behavior. Provide support, but do not take on responsibility for the corrective action. That belongs to them. Super important. Okay, so now number 9, drive to reach an agreement. And now if you're in an authoritative role, over this individual, then you're going to write this out in terms of this is the agreement that we've made. And this is how Joe is going to make sure that he self-polices with some support from me, his sarcasm, especially in a team environment where everybody is hearing it. Because sometimes, and the thing about sarcasm is there is a little element of truth in it, and that's what makes it so counterproductive. There's a more constructive way of approaching any issues or concerns that he has. But I asked Joe, hey, is there something real going on here? And he's like, no, I'm just, me, Dave, I'm just joking around. Okay, that's fine. Let's make sure that we're very, very careful about, the sarcasm thing. And if in doubt, ask me ahead of time. And if you do slip, I'll, kind of tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you're doing it again, brother. Okay, now the 10th, number 10, thank them. Thank them for taking the time to talk about this, difficult conversation, their willingness to open up and share their thoughts and their feelings, their, what's going on for them, and appreciate that they had the patience to work through with you and come to an agreement on the situation. Now, it sounds simple and easy, but it's not so much. A lot of it happens to be emotion that comes up in us. And that's why it's so important that we separate, those emotions by going through and taking the time. Number one, giving it a gap, later on this afternoon or tomorrow gives you time to process your own emotions. And then journalizing also, if you can name the emotion, it automatically lowers the impact of that emotion on you. So if you could say, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that. By labeling it, we've been able to prove through neuroscience that it actually lowers the impact of that particular emotion. Let's go through the 10 steps. So number one, ask for a time in the future, near future, you can have this conversation. I wouldn't allow more than 48 hours to go by. Otherwise, it takes too long. It's disconnected now. Number two, make sure you journalize your conversation. Write everything down. Look, if you have an HR person or an employee representative, that you can sit down with and say, this is the situation I'm having. This is kind of my notes. Can you give me feedback on it? That's ideal if it's a work situation. If it is outside of work, then you need to have maybe a close friend, confidant that you can share this with, and they can provide you feedback. Number three, be clear on the objectives and the outcome that you want to have as you walk away from this discussion. That's very important. If you don't have an end focal point, you could get lost, and that can be problematic. Number four, recognize what triggered you. Capture it. Try to put words to it. This is why you're being given the time to process your own feelings. That's very important. Identify factual situations and what was said or done so that the individual can recognize the fact that that was an event that happened, that there's evidence of this problem. Okay, now number five, and actually this is part of 4, write down specifically what was said and why it was a problem. So when you sit down to talk to them, tell them, this is what I want to talk about, and this is why it's important, so that they understand where you're coming from. Okay, now number 6, ask them for their perspective. Ask them for their thoughts, their feelings, and rationale. And it is super important at this point that we listen. And again, without judgment, without objections, attend the conversation with active listening. Don't give them, body language that says that you think they're full of it, right? No rolling the eyes or heavy sighs, and none of this. Be open, keep an open posture, lean forward and listen closely. Nod your head, showing that you understand. It's not agreement. Remember, nodding the head is not agreement. It's just showing that you understand. and then allow the person to share. And if you need to take some notes that you want clarification for, then write those down and let them know, look, I'm just writing down because I'm going to want clarity, but I don't want to break your concentration. Please continue. Okay. Of course, we're not answering our cell phones at this time. We're not texting. We're not giving our attention anywhere else but to that individual to show respect. Then the most important, right? Or one of the most important, at least, and that is ask them, what could they do to help change the behavior, to avoid the situation that is causing the problem? And let them know that you're going to partner with them to support and help them in whatever way you can, but ultimately the responsibility for change is theirs. Then, of course, 9, reach an agreement, write it down. Hey, we're going to see how this works. We'll get back together in a couple of weeks. We'll talk about what's working, what's not working. So you're going to want to make sure that you allow a full loop so that communication is not closed and that you do have a date in the future to come back together and discuss it and say, hey, Joe, you're doing a great job. I haven't heard any sarcasm lately, right? And then, of course, 10, thank them, show appreciation to the individual for taking the time to work with this or work through this with you. So those are the 10 steps to having difficult conversations. I want you to take the time to embrace these, put them into practice, because the more you use them, the better you get at them. And I hope this is very helpful. And until next Monday for Monday Morning Cup of Joe, have a great rest of your week and lead well, my friend.